Welcome to the Deep Dive,
Emerald City Hockey's Seattle Kraken podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Deep Dive podcast, Emerald City Hockey, Seattle Kraken podcast. RJ, we were just about ready to hit record. We were a little bit late because my car needed to go in for some work, and boy, did that save us from the biggest deep dive curse of all time. We were just about to finalize the schedule of what we were going to talk about today when the news came down that Dave Hakstol has been fired. He's no longer the head coach of the Seattle Kraken, so we are going to be talking a lot about that, I feel like, on this podcast, and not as much about any of that other stuff we were going to talk about. So we'll try to get into that right away. Of course, first we got to thank our wonderful sponsor, Queen Anne Beer Hall, for sponsoring this podcast, just like they do each and every week. Mariners have a road trip coming up in the beginning of May. Make sure to go and check out and watch all those Mariners road games at Queen Anne Beer Hall, especially this team right now, RJ. They are on fire with that pitching staff. Not batting well, just like this is the most Mariners of all Mariners teams. Can't bat at all, can't drive in any runs, but it doesn't matter because the pitching staff is there. So definitely go check out all the great stuff that they have going on at both Queen Anne Beer Hall locations. And then also wanted to real quick remind everybody that later on tonight, I will be having my prospect chat over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey. Going to be breaking down draft eligible guys, talking about what the Kraken should do with their probable 8th overall pick. There's other options for that pick, but most likely it'll be at the 8th spot. So excited to talk about that with everybody over at Patreon. We're going to be keeping the Patreon going through, hockey season and stuff. We were going to talk about that, but RJ, we just need to get into this. We need to talk about it. Dave Hakstol has officially been fired. We thought that things were kind of tracking this way, right? Like towards the end of the season, we felt like things were tracking this way. We got, he does media availability. He says, I'm still the coach. And he that was not a lie. He was still a coach during exit interviews for the players and him. But then a week ago from today, right, Ron Francis has his media availability, says that the decision hasn't been made. And now here we are a week later, the decision has been made. We talked last week. We were both on board with letting him go. We thought that a change needed to happen. And it appears that Ron Francis agreed.
Yeah, and they just, I guess, needed to finish the review process, as Ron Francis said. They needed to kind of take in all the information, decide which way to go. They've done that. They've made a decision now. And I think as we kind of broke down last week on the deep dive, I think it's the right call. And it's never easy to make these decisions, but I think the right choice has been made. I think Francis saw a lot of the things that, the issues that we talked about, where the team needed a new voice in the room. The guys didn't respond well when things didn't go well last season. And as a result, the team's going to have a new head coach. Also, assistant Paul McFarland has been relieved of his duties as well. No word yet on the other assistants, Dave Lowry, Jay Leach, Steve Briere. They all still remain with the team for now.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to get to. I'll just real quick read Ron Francis's quotes that were released alongside the news. He said, quote, "I thank Dave for his hard work and dedication to the Kraken franchise. Following our end of the season review, we have decided to make a change at our head coaching position. These decisions are never easy, but we feel this is a necessary step to help ensure our team continues to improve and evolve. Dave is a good coach and a terrific person. We wish him and his family all the best. We will begin our search for the Kraken's next head coach immediately." And then with Paul McFarland, we would also like to thank Paul for his contributions to our hockey team and wish him and his family well moving forward. We just got news also right before we got recording that Ron Francis is going to have a media availability at KCI a little bit later on. So we're recording this podcast, and then you are going to take off and go there for that, and we'll have stuff on Twitter. It's possible you'll see that before even listening to this podcast. So that's going to be interesting. But I mean, we talked about this, right? Like those last couple post-game lives at the end of the season during that road trip that the Kraken were on, during our live game commentary on Patreon. This was the sense that I got from it, right? Because the question was very much in the air. Is this going to take time? Are they going to fire him? What are they going to do? And I really thought they were going to take time, and it was going to come down to the review process. I really, really felt strongly that it was going to come down to the review process, and they were going to have to talk to the players, and they were going to have serious questions for Dave Hakstol. And based on his answers to those questions, I thought that was going to determine his future. And I guess that the answers from him and the players obviously signaled this sort of move. And again, I'm not that surprised, right? Like, we were on board with this. We thought that this was the kind of thing that had to happen. The one thing that we were unsure about was whether or not Ron Francis would actually do it. And here we are. Ron Francis has actually done it. This was, arguably something he needed to do for his job security. I still think this is a make or break year for him, regardless of having made this coaching change now versus maybe mid-season or sticking with Dave long term. But this just makes this like the biggest offseason in Kraken franchise history, right? Like since the team has existed. Yeah,
easily the biggest offseason. Yeah, since we were talking expansion draft and filling out every single spot of the roster. This is a huge offseason for the Kraken, and I think Francis realizes that. And I think he probably knows one of the things we discussed last week, which is this was his opportunity to make a coaching change. As a GM, generally, you're given one chance to change the coach before you yourself go. And I think he felt that just they needed somebody else to have the best chance of competing for a playoff spot next year, when Francis's own job could potentially be on the line, depending on how they do. So that decision makes sense. I'm with you. We were kind of both waiting for the exit interview process, right? And to see what the mood was from the team and from everybody. And that's really when I started to think this was a real possibility. Going into the exit interviews, I was all the way up to maybe 90-10 that Hakstol would stay. Just the fact he was participating in them, that he was talking to the media, that he was doing all that stuff. It seemed like that might be a sign that he was staying. But after hearing the tone that the players took, the things that the players had to say, it just felt to me like this was almost inevitable. And then also hearing the way that Ron Francis was non-committal about it, at that point, things really started to shift. And I mean, you could probably tell from our tone last week that we felt this was going to happen. It was just a matter of when, not if.
Yeah, I mean, certainly we thought it should. I'm with you, right? Exit interviews, the amount of even just late season player availabilities, the lack of answers, the lack of, I don't want to say awareness, but when you have players being like and saying, I don't know, like, oh, what went wrong this season? I don't know. Like, that's really bad. Like, you cannot have that if you are a head coach. It's one thing to not play up to a standard. It's one thing to have tried a system, and it just didn't work out, or the personnel didn't match up to it, right? It's another thing to not have answers. Right. That to me, it signaled, and I talked about this last week, but I'll just reiterate it here real quick. That signals that the coaching staff is not identifying the problems with the team. If they are identifying those problems, they're not communicating them effectively to the players, right? Like, all of these are massive issues in any sport, anywhere. You need to understand when things are not working, what is not working, what can we do to fix them? Now let's implement that. Let's fix them. Let's communicate that to the players. Like, that is the job of a coaching staff. And that wasn't happening here. It was not. Nothing was getting fixed. Nothing was being identified and talked about publicly. You have the players saying, I don't know. That means it's not really being communicated to them either. And that's just a fundamental problem. We also talked about stuff like the fact that they never really developed a solid system. I think the fact that Paul McFarland goes, we know he was in charge of the power play. The power play never really shook things up in any sort of significant way over 3 years. 3 years of iffy power play, and it just kind of never evolved or changed or worked on anything new. It never tried to innovate. Hakstol, system-wise, didn't really try to innovate too much either, and I think that it's no coincidence that those two are the ones that we know definitively are not coming back, versus, say, Jay Leach, who has done a lot of innovation on the PK at times when it started to struggle. They'll just completely shift up what they're running, or on D, right? How the defenders are playing, whether they're more conservative, maybe a little bit more aggressive. We've seen that change over the course of each season. I got to think that that's probably not a coincidence as well.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And you look at I guess there wasn't really the willingness to kind of change things and address things as you talked about. And also just from a general standpoint, at least what was said publicly. And I'll get back into what I talked about a little last week, but just the messaging when things were not going well, and the unwillingness to bench or scratch regular players, to kind of have that as a stick if you're not playing well enough. And then the unwillingness to really send a strong message publicly that you don't walk back maybe the next day as far as the team needing to play better, right? And I think I do wonder, because again, we'll never know what was said privately. I'm sure Hakstol and Francis met and really broke everything down from this season. But if you look at kind of the tone that Hakstol took publicly during the exit interviews, he defended a lot of what the team did and how things were approached. And especially, like, I asked him kind of point blank about he sent a message, and you can argue how much of a message was actually sent. But after that Montreal game late in the season, when the 9-game losing streak, things were off the rails. And he said, we have a decision to make. It's obvious what that decision is. Do we want to play the right way, or do we not want to play the right way? And I asked him, how did he think the team responded to that challenge? And he had glowing things to say about that. He said he thought they responded really well, and he went, game by game and talked about how, the effort was there, and they responded really well to that challenge. Even that San Jose game at the end, the fan appreciation night where they lost, he was adamant. He said, we did not phone that one in. That one was a real effort. We just couldn't get by the goalie. And I know, Dylan, you and I had to experience all of those meaningless games toward the end of the season, and a lot of them losses, and it didn't always feel like the effort was fully there, and certainly the production and the execution wasn't there. To go and defend that sort of thing and say, and I know it's tough to always play those games and they're meaningless, but I wonder if if he did strike that same tone with Francis, and I'm Francis listening to that, I've got to think, that's nice and all, but next season, if my job's potentially on the line, we have to do better.
Well, it's not just Francis either. It's ownership. If you're ownership, do you want to hear that? Like, no, especially like there's a lot of losing at home. Like, that's one of the things that's, kind of always been known about this team, is that they do struggle in Seattle for whatever reason. And if I'm anybody in charge, that's a problem for me. And great, guys responded from an effort standpoint. Let's say the effort's there. Why have you not fixed anything else, right? Then that's on you as the coach to be like, look, they can't finish. Let's put them in better positions to finish. Let's change how we're running things back game after game. When really the one problem, yes, there was the effort issues at times this season, but if you're saying you can fix the effort issue by challenging them, then why did the scoring problem never get fixed? Right? Like, yes, some of that is on the roster. This isn't the highest of skilled rosters. We know that about this team. But also, there's a lot of things you could do to grind out some goals, to manufacture some goals, to get things done. You know what they are if you work in hockey. If you are a head coach or even an assistant coach at the NHL level, you know that it's stuff like going to the net, right? Putting bodies there, fighting for rebounds, doing all of that kind of stuff. That is the formula. Everybody at every level knows this. Why didn't you ever do it? And that would have been the big sticking point for me if I'm Ron Francis, if I'm ownership, if I'm anybody involved in the decision-making process here. I'm asking him, why did we never change things up? Why did we never change where guys were going to be on the ice? Why did we never change how they were going to receive the puck, what the cycle was going to be to put them in different places to maybe see if that could help them score? Why is it that if I go on NHL Edge and I look at the shot charts for most of these players, they're all like weird off to the side and in these weird perimeter spots instead of being right down the middle like every successful player's is, right? Like, those would have been the questions. And I got to think that, based on the fact that Hakstol never changed any of that stuff, he could not have had a good answer for it. Because you can't say, well, yeah, I thought about that, but I decided not to, right? Like, that's not good. And so I just think it's a combination of all of these things. But those couple things in particular, the three things we talked about there, right? Not sending a message, not changing things up at any point, not having even a system to be working with to change even. Like, these are significant problems. Not communicating what the team isn't doing well to the players, so the players have an idea of what that is and can communicate that back to you. Like, those are all the things that lead to coaches getting fired. Again, in any sport, like, this is not unique to hockey. This is a pretty universal concept. If the results are not there and you have those questions, you can't stick with that coach. And that's just what happened here. Unfortunately, because like as Ron said, Dave's a terrific person. And he is. I really liked him. But the bottom line is it's a results-driven business, and the results I don't think we're going to change based on the fact that we weren't seeing anything change along the way. And I can't imagine that an offseason really would have done that much different.
Right. That's what it comes down to. And I think it's tough also. Like, I'm glad you brought that up. And we should probably have talked about that a little bit more just at the very beginning of that. Dave is a great person. He was wonderful to work with. I spent so much time around the team and, interacting with him, just about every other day during the season. Right. And he was a joy to work with. And it's always tough to see somebody like that get let go from their job that they clearly care about so much. And that was never an issue. Right. And I think this is one of those really unusual situations too, where I don't think he ever lost the room. You look at, 90+% of all coaches that get let go and they've lost the room. The players are tired of playing for them. They want somebody else. They're sick of playing for that guy. And I really don't think that was the case here. And, there were other issues, of course, as we've just gone over, right? All the issues. But I don't think that was ever the case, that the players were tired of him. And I think that speaks to, his coaching style and the positive aspects of it and the kind of things that helped the group last year get as far as they went. Because you could see just the positive culture and the positive attitude around the team. And so, that certainly, was a factor there that led to some success. And it just also, around the media, he was great with us. His dry sense of humor was really great. And I'm going to miss that. Like he had the capability of being really funny at times when, he'd make a joke, or even he kind of sneak it in somewhere, like the give a bleep meter, where that was just in the middle of a question, right? And he's, guys, give a, what meter is high. And we all had to like, wait a sec, did you just say that? Yeah. Did you just say that word? So that was good. And one thing I will think about that's kind of funny, and our buddy Darren Brown from Sound of Hockey did bring this up the other day. And, if Dave was let go, his last interaction with the media was actually me giving him a Jimmy John's sandwich.
Yep.
The end of his presser. So I'll certainly always have those memories. It's kind of odd as the last thing to remember, but yeah, that's how it goes sometimes.
There you go, RJ. You and the Jimmy John's sandwich is the kiss of death.
I guess so. Yeah, I'm not bringing Jimmy John's to the end of your media availability.
You're not going to bring him to see Ron Francis in a couple hours?
No, I think he might decline the sandwich there. If I was him, I would.
Be a smart move. Yes, be a smart move on his part. But yeah, it is always a tough thing. When anybody loses a job in any industry in any sort of way, right? Like it's a tough thing. Didn't even make it to his extension, right? Like it's so crazy because a year ago, this time of year, they're extending him for another 3 years, I think it was, right? And it didn't make it there. He still gets that money.
I mean, that's the reality for coaches of this league, though. You see that, right? I mean, he was already the 6th longest tenured coach in the league. Had he made it another week, I think he might have been 5th, depending on what happens to Sheldon Keefe. But yeah, it's a really tough business.
It really is. So, but this is how this business operates, right? And it does not change for anyone, really, right? Like it doesn't matter how successful you have been in the past, there is always an end date. You will always have an expiration date, whether it's you're in the front office, whether you're a player, whether you're a coach. That is just how this business operates. You need continued results, and it is really hard to have continued results over a long stretch of time. I mean, I don't even know really where we go from here, RJ.
I have an idea real quick, because you brought up the assistants, of course. We talked about the news with them a little bit. I want to dive a little deeper into the assistants and what we think should happen with them and what we think will happen with them. Just real quick, kind of assistant coach by assistant coach. So Paul McFarland, of course, is gone. The Kraken let go of him. We both had called for that.
We've called for that for years.
Yeah. So I think, we've said our piece on that. And so we'll kind of move on from that one. But Jay Leach, interestingly, still, at least for now, with the coaching staff. Now, he's got some head coaching interviews in the past, like with the Bruins before they hired Montgomery. He's somebody that teams have looked at from a head coaching perspective. I think it's probably a matter of time before that happens for him at some point. What are you thinking as far as Jay Leach? And do they keep him around, or do you think this is just not wanting to make the move yet?
Well, this is one of the interesting things that I had brought up right when we right before we had started was I don't know, do we know the length of contract on these guys? Like, is it possible?
I don't believe we do.
Yeah, so it's possible, like, just to throw this out there for everybody, it's possible that only Dave Hakstol and Paul McFarland were under contract for next season so that they had to be fired. It's possible that you could just, if you are going to be making changes to the coaching staff, if this was the last year of, say, Jay Leach's contract, his contract just then runs out on June 30th or whatever, right? And then you just don't re-sign him, kind of thing. So it is possible that there are more changes, and then obviously whatever new head coach comes in is going to be evaluating the staff and is going to make any changes that they want to make. So that's, just to throw that out there, is that we don't know that these guys aren't leaving, and there's a good chance that they will just because a new coach will come in. Jay Leach is the one that's the toughest for me. I'm the most on the fence. Right, because like you said, he has had some looks in the past. I felt like he was a lot stronger years 1 and 2 than he was this year. Like this year, there was some issues on defense that kind of gave me pause. The penalty kill stuff has all been excellent. I enjoy that stuff about the penalty kill. Need to have more players like Brandon Tanev on it so that maybe you don't have to rely on Brandon Tanev as much. But that's a different story. But there was various points during this season where we had podcasts, we had post games, and we were talking about focus issues on defense. And that the defense, especially this year, there was a lot of moments where they were making some really, really, below rookie mistakes. Like this is stuff that we would coach kids at 10, 12 years old to not do, and they're out there doing it. And it was one of those too where I was questioning, do they just not watch film because they're making these same basic mistakes game after game after game, and nothing was really being addressed? And so that side of it is making me question Jay Leach coming back and whether or not he should, just because this year there were some pretty basic fundamental problems with the D-core that it took a very, very long time to see addressed. And that to me gives me a little bit of pause. But like years 1 and year 2, I would have been on board with making him the head coach. So I don't know.
Yeah. And that's a tough one to evaluate too, I would say, because that's not system stuff. That's not tactical. That's something that you can just address mid-season without having to change up anything else. Right. And I get back to your point about watching film, and this is something I wanted to say last week, but I forgot. That you've said to me a few different times, right, this season, it's a team that looks like they just don't watch film. Like they don't watch any film because they're not correcting these easily correctable things that if you watch the tape, you can take note of and do differently next time.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the Kraken watch film.
Yeah.
I see they have their meeting schedule on the board after the games. You can see film meeting. They watch film. We know this, of course. Every team watches film. But you can watch film and you cannot really take it in. That's what I think might be the case here. And on that one, I think I'd point less to Jay Leach and more to just the overall coaching staff and culture that was created, especially when there's, as I mentioned earlier, not really consequences when you make those mistakes. You're not going to get less ice time, at least over the long term. You're not going to be pulled out of the lineup at any point if you're a regular player. And that's the kind of thing that I think can lead to guys watching film, but not really receiving those messages that they need to. And so I'm tempted to give Jay Leach the benefit of the doubt on that one, because I'm sure he's showing them these things. Like, how could he not be, right?
Right.
It's just on the players to take that message in and execute it. And I mean, really, that's on the players first and foremost. But then besides that, it's on the ultimate decision maker is, the head coach setting up the culture to make sure that if you don't take in that message, you're going to have some kind of consequence for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And forget about not even benching guys. D-core, outside of times where there was injuries, never saw the pairings changed at all. Think of how many times the forward group was thrown into the line blender. We never saw the D pairs touched, right? From trade deadline last season in year 2, they did not change. And that's a problem. That's an issue. There was times this year where you needed to send a message to that group. And yes, that is not on Jay Leach to do. Right? He does not, I'm assuming, have the authority to change up the D pairs. That would not be traditional anyway. So yes, that is fair. There's still a part of me that goes, look, if you're the one in there doing those film sessions with the D group, like you could get on them and maybe try to get their attention maybe a little bit more. But based on years 1 and year 2, it looked like he did. Like it was all there. And so, yes, it is something that maybe the culture just finally caught up and there was nothing he could do without having the authority to change things on the larger scale. You've talked me into it. I'm fine with him coming back if he stays.
Okay. I wasn't even necessarily completely advocating for that, but I still think he's a really great coach, especially from what we've heard from the defensemen who've worked with him. They all have glowing things to say about him. And just, look at Will Borgen. Like that's example number one.
Will Borgen, Vince Dunn.
Yeah.
Huge growth from those guys. Like he has done a ton of work with them, and yes, some of that has been like Adam Larson, Jamie Alexiak as veterans, kind of helping them grow and whatever. But that is also it speaks volumes about Jay Leach and what he's been able to teach them. So sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's all good. But I wouldn't have a problem with him coming back. He's a fantastic coach. And I think we've kind of said our piece there. But moving on to Dave Lowry, who I think was a great presence added behind the Kraken bench that really stabilized a lot of things going into last season. Ron Francis said after their inaugural season that there were times where they just didn't have enough coaches to cover everything that needed to be covered, especially in game. So they wanted to bring another guy, kind of like a rover, someone who wasn't just offense or defense like McFarland or Leach, to kind of help out with everything. And I thought Lowry did a fantastic job of that, especially in year 2, his first year coming in, where he was able to just stabilize and make adjustments mid-game in a way that we really liked. The problem, with him is I think usually you see when a guy like that is brought in, they're kind of tied to the existing coaching staff. So personally, I'd be really surprised if he was brought back, just also because I think he might have opportunities elsewhere. Yeah. And that maybe you don't want to stick in with with an incumbent, with a new coach, coming in. And also, just in general, you mentioned it a little bit, but by and large, when you have a new head coach coming in, they're going to want to pick their assistants. They're going to want to handpick those guys. And usually it's guys they're bringing over from a previous job. It's people they already have past relationships with. So I think it's unlikely really that Leach and Lowry or, that either one would stay. So, like you mentioned a little bit, but also if I'm trying to attract the best head coach, if I'm Ron Francis, I'm going to give them full say over the coaching staff, and they're probably going to want to bring in their own guys. So that's kind of all I have to say about Lowry. Yeah,
I was going to say that's got to be standard too, right? Like if you're hiring somebody from like that's got to be part of the understanding is that they would have the control to build out the staff as they saw fit. I'm with you. Lowry, I like Dave Lowry a lot. I thought that he helped the team a ton. Having his presence there, having somebody who could additionally focus on different things during a game and then communicate to players. I feel like of anybody on this coaching staff, he was at times the best guy communicating to players as far as just getting through to them and speaking their language and getting them to recognize things mid-game and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like he was a really effective assistant coach. But yes, not being tied to a position group. Like the one thing that I could see would keep Jay Leach around is the relationship he has with that D-core that's going to largely remain the same for next season. So maybe if you are a new coach, you would want to keep some continuity there because it's kind of an important position group or something. And we'll talk about that in a moment when we talk about goaltending for sure. But with Dave Lowry, it would be a little bit more like it would be odd, I think, if he was kept on just because of the nature of the change here.
Yeah, I think so too. I really wouldn't expect him back. And so moving on to goaltending, you brought it up a little bit. And I think of the 3 assistants that we're talking about here, I think this is the most important one. Yeah. And it's not particularly close. And that is Steve Briere, the Kraken's goalie coach. He took over for Andrew Allen after year 1 and really solidified the position there. He has done fantastic work working with Philip Grubauer and Joey Decord. You look at the season Joey had this year, and a lot of that is on the goalie coach, and Grubauer and Decord have both spoken glowingly about him. Martin Jones, look at what he did with Martin Jones last year. Magnus Hellberg, even in his brief time here, had a great time with Steve Briere and just, said how fun that he makes everything. And so I would hope that Briere comes back, and that is something there is precedent for. You will often see goalie coaches survive a head coaching change because it's just that relationship with that coach and the goalies. And it's, it's a little more separate from the rest of everything. And also head coaches generally don't have goalie coaches that they're attached to or that leave for different jobs. So I think Francis should do whatever he can to make sure that Steve Briere stays.
Agreed. I mean, you look at the difference between year one and year two, Philip Grubauer, it's massive. Like you said, right? Working with Martin Jones, Joey Decord, Chris Drieger, right? Like everybody that the Kraken have kind of brought in since he's been there has worked out, right? They've looked good. I mean, goaltending was far from this team's problem this year, right? Like that was not the issue at all. And so I don't think you can make the change there. If I'm a new coach coming in, I look at that. It's a different relationship. It's a different bond. It's a different way of working with people. When you are the goaltending coach, like you said, it is different. It's separate. Like it is very separate. And so I would love to see Steve Briere stay. I would hope that he does. And like I said, if I'm a coach coming in, I would want him as a part of my staff.
Oh yeah, easily. I think the only way that he leaves is if he just gets poached by another NHL team that maybe gives him a more attractive offer. But I think Francis should do whatever he can to make sure that doesn't happen.
Exactly. And if I'm ownership, I'd be on board with that or anything like that. But especially with Joey and Grubauer coming back next year, and you're going to have a new head coach in charge of that tandem. I think having as much continuity for them, given the nature of that position, would be the best idea. Like even if you wanted to make a change, I don't know that making a change while the rest of the team is also going through a change is the best idea.
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely some potential negative effects there for sure. And if the goaltending really did drop off after you make that coaching change, I think you could point to that immediately as why.
Yeah. If I'm a new coach coming in, I don't want to shoot myself in the foot by putting my goaltenders in an uncomfortable position after they just turned in a pretty phenomenal season. So, I don't think things will change there. So that's the assistant coaching staff that still remains as of now, question mark. And our thoughts on them. I'd love to hear other people's thoughts on them too, because I especially know like Steve Briere, lots of people very passionate about him and everything. So I'm assuming most people would be on board with him staying based on past interactions we've had related to him. Looking ahead at things, because we had speculated last week when Ron Francis had come out and said that no decision has been made yet. We're still figuring it out, all that stuff. And he had referenced the Nashville situation, right? And it led us to speculate that maybe he was waiting on somebody who is currently coaching somewhere else, but may become available depending on how a postseason run goes. And that covers both the NHL, which everybody was very excited to talk about, but we'd also mentioned that could also cover the AHL too. Right? Like if a team goes on a real run at the AHL level, you want to wait and see if that coach is then available for you. And we've thrown some names around there a little bit. I mean, only one team has been eliminated from the playoffs right now. Right? Yeah. And that's the Washington Capitals. And I don't know that they're interested in making a change there, and I don't know that the Kraken would be all
it's his first year for Carberry. No.
Yeah, that's not really going to happen. So where do you stand on that side of things now, RJ? Like the timing of this, do you think Francis has watched enough of the postseason to maybe get a feel, both AHL and NHL, of guys that might be available? Or do you think it was just, as the exit interview process came down, it was just more and more obvious that he just could not keep Dave Hakstol regardless of who was going to be available?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, and I think this timing makes that very clear, that they were just waiting to do the thorough review process and make sure that they took in all the information they needed to. They didn't want to make a rash decision. Now, had this, because Francis did mention, I believe to Ian Furness in an interview like later that day, that he even compared it with Nashville's timeline last year, where they waited until June to get rid of their coach because they saw someone had become available. This is not that situation, I think, and it this timing tells you that. So I think they just decided, Hakstol had to go. They needed a new voice. So I don't think you can really read into them waiting on anybody particular that may still be available or that may still be, occupied with the playoffs and everything, because so many coaches are. Mm-hmm. I think whoever this next coach is, pretty decent chance that they're working right now. Whether it's coaching an AHL or NHL team as a head coach or assistant, just most successful coaches are coaching teams this time of year. So I don't think we can read into that a whole lot. But we can still look at some names that I think maybe they would look at for next year. Now, we just got the news about Hakstol being fired minutes before we started recording this. Yeah. So we didn't do the full prep and everything for head coaching candidates, and we'll do a deeper dive on that later in the summer. There's still going to be plenty of time to do that. I think, maybe even next week we'll kind of look at some more serious options and having done more research, but we kind of were waiting until that shoe dropped, I think, to really fully dive into it to make sure that it would in fact be necessary. But Dylan, right now, immediate reaction as Hakstol has just been fired. Who would you like to see? What names come to your mind as potential intriguing options for the next Kraken head coach?
Yeah, well, I mean, address the elephant in the room, right? Dan Bylsma, excuse me. He's, done a fantastic job with the Firebirds. You see it every time, obviously I see it every time I go out there to Coachella Valley. The incredible culture he's built, the incredible staff he's built around him, the way he's worked and developed players, been able to take undrafted guys like a Logan Morrison or a Ty Cartier and get them not only into the AHL level, but then make them so solid, so confident, play a style that is so easy to translate to the NHL level that we've seen them be able to immediately translate to the NHL level a year after they've signed. Not even a full season after they've signed. All of the work he's done, every time we see Coachella Valley guys come up to the NHL level, the passion they play with, the fire they play with, the system they're able to play with if they're playing with each other. We saw that late season with Logan Morrison and Ryan Winterton. I think Dan Bylsma would be an excellent hire. We've speculated in the past how much he would be interested in it, and I still think that that's a question. I could ask him next time I'm out there, but I'm telling you right now, he will not give an answer, so there's almost no point in it. He is going to say that he is focused on the Firebirds, and that's where his attention's at, and I 1,000% believe him when he would say that. That is, and it should be, his only focus at the moment. But I think we should start there. I would love to have him, right? He's a fantastic person. Again, talking about great human beings. He is a great human being. He would bring in a system. I think it would be a good system. It's a solid system that he runs with the Firebirds. The way he coaches guys up, he makes players better, especially young players. That's going to be important as the Kraken's great draft classes are starting to graduate and get closer to being NHL ready and maybe even looking at breaking into the NHL now. So I think all of those aspects, it would be great if Dan Bylsma was the head coach of the Seattle Kraken. I just don't know how much he wants it.
Right. And we've talked about that in the past. I think we both know how happy he is coaching the Firebirds and how great of a gig he has there. And like we said, he has nothing left to prove at the NHL level either. He's won a Stanley Cup. Yeah. He doesn't need to take on that kind of stress and that kind of lifestyle again. He just doesn't need it. But if he's interested, he's right now the top guy on my list. I think now that's barring other guys potentially becoming available. Obviously, if Tampa gets rid of a John Cooper or Carolina gets rid of a Rod Brindamore, then you reevaluate what your list is. But as far as obvious guys who could be available right now, I don't think you can do much better than Dan Bylsma if he wants the job. I think if other coaches in the NHL, like experienced guys who are clearly top tier coaches, if those guys don't really shake loose, depending on how things happen in the playoffs, I think you have to make him say no. At least force him to tell no. You have to, really try and get him on board. And I think he'd be a fantastic option. We see how much the players love him there. I mean, you said it all very well. I won't really repeat all the stuff that you said, but Dan Bylsma would be awesome as a head coaching candidate. Just a matter of I think, if he wants the job or not. And also if other names potentially become available. So let's look at some other names.
Well, I was just going to say one last thing on him. If you're Ron Francis, are you interested in that, or do you feel like you have to go outside of the organization here after everything that's happened?
I don't think you have to go outside the organization just because of the resume that Dan Bylsma's built for himself. Yeah. I mean, you've got a close look at him. I think you look at everything going on with the Kraken this year, and you compare that with everything going on with the Firebirds the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
And it is just night and day. I mean, you've spent time in both environments, Dylan, right? You've gone to Firebirds games, you've come here for Kraken games. I remember talking to you and you talk about just how fun everything is down there, how much of a winning culture they have, how great a time everyone is having, and especially contrasting that with how things were here for the last 15, 20 games of the season and just how miserable everybody seemed. I think it's separate enough that if you can kind of import some of that, and I think they actually did with some of the young guys, it initially coming up with Morrison and Winterton, that was a little bit contagious. If you could bring that whole culture over, why wouldn't you want to do it?
Yeah, no, anybody who didn't, like, if that was an option and you decided not to, you're a fool. I'll just say it. Like that would be enough for me to be like, Ron Francis has to go if that came out somehow. So yeah, no, I'm all on board. I just thought I would ask the question, right? If you're Ron Francis,
that's a good question.
You've got the one change, and you basically, your job, at least in our opinions, relies solely on the performance of next season. Do you want to maybe then look somewhere else? But yes, let's talk about looking somewhere else. Let's say Dan Bylsma is off the table. Who is like the first name for you?
The first name, I mean, it depends if we're looking at coaches that are still employed and, may shake loose. Like, obviously,
we're speculating right now. Like, it's a brand new idea. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, well, if Tampa loses in 5 and John Cooper for some reason gets let go, you have to do everything you possibly can to bring him in. Yeah. He is option number 1. I mean, he's the longest tenured coach in the NHL right now. He's got multiple Stanley Cups. I don't know that you could convince him to come to Seattle right away. Like, I think if you're Cooper, you probably have better options.
Yes.
But if for whatever reason he hits the market, he has to be number 1 on everybody's list. You do whatever you can to get him. So beyond that, because I think that's still just quite unrealistic. Another name that's been thrown around a lot because of the Hurricanes connections and everything is Rod Brind'Amour. I know you're not his biggest fan as far as just the results that the Hurricanes have had, especially the playoff collapses in the past. How would you feel about Rod the Bod, Dylan?
Look, great guy. I like the culture that he has going on in Carolina, except for when it comes to the playoffs. They are a fantastic regular season team. I think the systems he runs as a head coach work really well for the regular season. The way they can play in front of goaltenders, all that kind of stuff. Like there's a lot to like about what Rod Brind'Amour brings to the table, and I think he would bring a lot of the stuff that Dave Hakstol lacked. Right? Like they would be different enough that I think a lot of the problems that Dave Hakstol ran into would not be problems that Rod Brind'Amour would have. The problem is the postseason. Like Carolina pretty regularly, you mentioned the collapses. Sometimes it's not like they don't even start, right? For whatever reason, whether it's the culture, I think it's more so system-wise, they just don't really play playoff hockey. He's struggled to kind of adapt his coaching style and the systems he runs to playoff-style hockey, and it's been an issue for him in the past, and it has not been an issue so far this postseason run, but he's also only playing the Islanders. I'm waiting for the second round, especially because, they're going to be playing the Rangers, right? Like, that's going to be a really interesting test, and if they lose in, say, 5... right? And it looks like they just cannot hang again. I think that speaks volumes as to this is a systemic problem with him that, we talked about. Dave Hakstol wasn't really able to adapt and change and grow and develop and correct the things that are going wrong. At some point, you say the same thing in that situation. How many postseasons do you need to look at and say, well, it just, the right changes have just not been made? And that's kind of where I'm at with Rod Brind'Amour. That being said, the Kraken would win more games with him in the regular season. They are a playoff team right now, I think, if you bring in Rod Brind'Amour. And that's attractive. If you're Ron Francis, if you're the Kraken ownership, if you're a Kraken fan, that's a very attractive proposition. And you're just like, hey, maybe it's just the guys in Carolina that can't get it done in the postseason, and it's not Rod Brind'Amour, right? Like, let's give that a chance, because I think under his leadership, this is a playoff team.
Definitely. I think if you're Francis and you're looking at Brind'Amour, you're thinking this is the coach that can help save my job and that can make it fun to watch Kraken hockey again too. It is really fun watching those Carolina Hurricanes teams. It is. And yeah, they do flame out in the playoffs a lot of the time. They've got some great players on paper, and so you look at potentially them underperforming, but man, even when they go out, they're getting a ton of shots on goal, they're generating chances. And I mean, usually it's, again, things like not going to the inside or going to the areas where you need to go to play playoff hockey, but still, the regular season turnaround, I think, would look very good under Rod Brind'Amour. So certainly not the worst option, maybe not the best, but I wouldn't have an issue with it if Francis decides to go there. I think you can do a lot worse than him. Yeah,
and I was just looking to see if they've gone to, 2 conference finals in his however many seasons, but they've been a playoff team every year he's been there.
Yeah, they have. I mean, that's something, that consistency is something that a lot of teams would like. And a couple of conference finals appearances too. Did they win a game in either of those conference finals?
They did not, no.
Yeah, so that's the issue as far as getting over that next hump. But you know what? if you're the Kraken and you like bring in a star player, however you're going to do it, if you're Ron Francis, right, and you can be a team that consistently goes 2-3 rounds deep, I don't think you're all that concerned about what happens when you get there. You'll cross that bridge when you come to it, right?
Yeah.
That means you've already succeeded and you've engaged the fan base too. I think that's the other thing that the team is looking at, whether it's probably ownership, right?
Yeah.
Making sure you have this limited window to attract fans before the Sonics come back. And you have to make sure that, I mean, the TV deal is a big part of it. We plan to talk a little bit more about that in this episode originally. But, you know, you're, as far as fixing those sorts of things, you look at the example in Carolina, even though they don't have the Stanley Cup under Brind'Amour to show for it, look at those fans. Yeah. Look at that atmosphere in that building for a non-traditional hockey market.
Yep.
And I think if you can bring that sort of thing over to Seattle consistently, you're golden.
Yeah. No, we were definitely going to talk about the TV stuff. We'll probably do it at the very end and then spend more time on that next week, just because this news kind of usurps everything. Talking about that side of things. And also we had more people reach out and leave comments like on YouTube and stuff about, you know, we keep mentioning the Sonics coming back and what that means for the Kraken. And we've talked briefly about it in the past. We were planning on talking about that more in depth today too. But again, bigger news came around, so next week we'll talk a lot more in depth about the broadcasting news, what it means for the Kraken, what they're hoping to accomplish from it, and then from the Sonics perspective, what them coming back at some point here soon-ish means for the Kraken, and the kind of position the Kraken want to be in for when that does happen, and why that's important, and what that all means. Unfortunately, yes, not going to do it this week, going to do it next week, but hey, it's a long off season. There's going to be a lot of time to address that kind of stuff and answer any questions everybody has. So, but please keep asking those questions. Please leave comments.
Yeah, we see those comments.
We
will
get
them.
to them.
Yeah, definitely.
Coach probably won't get fired again next week.
Yeah, probably not. So no, that had to go to the top of the list. And I think everybody listening understands, why we're talking about it and the priority and everything. But I mean, any other coaches that you wanted to talk about? I had a couple more on the, but
yeah, there's two that I want to talk about. We've kind of talked about them in the past. Number one for me is Carl Taylor. I'd at least want to interview him. I want to bring him in. I want to talk to him because he's for those who don't know who he is, he's the current head coach of the Milwaukee Admirals, and the work that he's done with the Milwaukee Admirals at the AHL level has been tremendous. I mean, that team, just like with the Firebirds, I mean, they are just perennially successful under his leadership. They have done a lot of great stuff on the ice, and he just screams to me as the kind of guy that is ready to take that next step to the NHL level. I don't know what else he could potentially prove at the AHL level outside of, say, a championship, but that's different. I'm really, really fascinated, like watching the Firebirds in the Western Conference Final against them last year. Probably a matchup we'll see again this year as well. Just the style that team was able to play with going up against the Firebirds. They gave the Firebirds a lot of problems. And did that series go the distance, actually? I'm trying to remember.
I think it did.
I think it might have, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, they gave the Firebirds a lot of problems with what I would consider a slightly weaker roster. And they were able to solve Joey at times and stuff. And he just really, really impressed me with how he was able to run that team and how that team operated. And just seeing that I was there for 2 games of that series, how their team was off the ice too. Gave me a lot of confidence in the culture and stuff that he could build. So Carl Taylor is a big one for me if we're looking outside the NHL circle.
Right. I will second everything you said on Carl Taylor. I think if the Kraken are going to go with a first-time NHL head coach, he is the guy. You already talked about his great resume with Milwaukee and everything. We actually looked at him back in 2021 as the Kraken before they hired Dave Hakstol. We were looking at coaching options. And at that time, it was a little bit more of a gamble, right? He was this up-and-comer who had just signed with Milwaukee and had a really good season there, and someone we identified with potential ability as a really good head coach. He's only bolstered his resume from then on. And so I think he, like you said, he has nothing left to prove at the AHL level. I think he's ready for it. I would certainly welcome that.
Yeah, definitely. So that's one for me. Do you want to go back and forth, or should I say my second guy?
Yeah, go ahead. Say your second one, and then I can talk about a few other options.
All right, so my second one is somebody that has been brought up on some streams in the past. Some people have talked about him, and hey, why wouldn't you? Especially here recently, given what he did at the Frozen Four again. That's David Carl. He's head coach at it's at the University of Denver, and the stuff he's been able to do with that program has been really phenomenal. Talk about building a culture and a sustained success, especially with the roster turnover that you have at the NCAA level, at the collegiate level, right? It's a little bit different than at the pro ranks. But the way that he's able to just bring in fresh group after fresh group and take them to national championships, winning national championships, going to the finals pretty consistently year after year. The adversity through COVID and all of that kind of stuff at that level has been so impressive. You look, he was the head coach for the USA World Junior team that just won gold at this past World Juniors as well. You look at how he was able to come in, be successful with that group of players. He connects with young players. He connects with guys. He's able to build a really strong culture. It's a winning culture. He does fantastic work at adapting and changing as his rosters adapt and change. He changes up his system, but he has like an overall umbrella that he likes guys to play in, but he's able to do the little tweaks here and there based on what he's got going on roster wise, and all of that stuff just tells me that he is ready. He's another guy that just screams at some point he is going to be an NHL head coach. He's very young. He's only 34. He's only kind of done this at the NCAA level, so I could see, that might be a little bit more of a long shot, him to just make the jump straight to the NHL, especially when he's got such a good thing going. I mean, 2 championships in 3 years, it'd be hard to leave that, especially because he's really built that program and got it kind of there. But he's another one where it checks all the boxes I look for, right? It's culture and its system, and then its ability to tweak the system as needed. Like, those are the 3 big things for me, and he checks all of those easy.
Yeah, and I don't think the age should be something that should scare the Kraken away. I mean, the Kraken are a pretty forward-looking, pretty progressive organization. And you and I, Dylan, have both maintained for a while, there's a ton of coaching talent outside of the guys that we all know that just get recycled around the league, that, get 3-4 coaching stints, right? That we would like to see more teams go with somebody who's been promising somewhere else outside the NHL versus just another retread coach. And so I wouldn't have any problem with bringing in Carl there to be the Kraken's coach. And also, if he works out too, having a young guy there who can be in the job for a long time. I know coaches generally don't have a ton of longevity, but, to have somebody where you don't need to worry about, that end point is good. I might prefer him over actually a lot of the kind of the retread coaches, other guys that I'll talk about soon, right? I would rather them go that direction. I'd still take Carl Taylor over him just because of the more proven resume.
Yeah.
And it's, it'd be tough for him to leave the great situation he has there. But if anything's going to prime out of that job, NHL head coaching job, what more could you want?
Yeah, and he's got some experience, he's done a lot of work there with Denver, but really the person who actually kind of kickstarted this success for Denver was Jim Montgomery, who's the current head coach of the Boston Bruins, one of the better NHL head coaches right now, right? Somebody that I think any team would want to bring in if you had the opportunity, and that was the coaching tree that he was a part of, essentially, right? That he learned directly as an assistant under Jim Montgomery, and then was able to take that and run with it. And so when you look at, especially with a younger guy who doesn't have as much experience, you look for things like that. And that's a green flag, right? Okay, he worked under somebody who did make that jump from the NCAA to the NHL and has had a lot of success at the NHL level as a coach. That is something that also, again, it's not as important for me, but it's another box that he checks.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we'll see some of that. I wonder, it's a larger conversation for a different time, but when we'll see that change in the NHL too, where you've seen it a ton in the NFL, where you have younger guys who have that success. And now you have teams just bidding wars all over themselves, trying to get a hold of these guys. Really kind of start with Sean McVay and that whole coaching tree in the NFL. And
so
the
I'm
success
talking about going after assistants, you mean? Yeah. Of certain guys. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But going after that tree, and then also, I'm also talking about just a younger guy who's in his 30s, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas I think a lot of NHL teams might get scared away by that. But you've seen in other sports, they've kind of let that go because you've seen younger coaches able to have that kind of success. So, that's another thing I'm wondering when we'll see. But Carl, I think at some point he'll get an NHL coaching opportunity, and why not Seattle?
Yeah, exactly. So those are like the two guys right now for me that I wanted to get out there and kind of start petitioning. If Ron Francis is listening to this and wants some names to add to his list, those would be the two.
Yeah, no, and I'm sure he's going to build a very extensive list that's probably going to include those names for sure. I mean, lastly, because those, I think we've kind of exhausted the names that I want to talk about that I'd really recommend and that I would say, okay, this is someone who excites me. I do want to talk about some names that will certainly be discussed over the next few weeks that maybe we wouldn't be as thrilled about. And I won't start with the names that I really wouldn't want to see. I'll leave those till the end. But someone that I think needs to be mentioned, and I see people on Twitter already talking about it in just the quick aftermath of Hakstol's firing. Michael Russo, who covers the Minnesota Wild, said, "I felt for months Dean Evason makes sense here. Long history with Ron Francis. Could you see that connection maybe coming again together? And would you support Dean Evason as the Kraken's coach? Just on, we'll do more research later, but like, what's your initial thought on a guy like Dean Evason?"
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this back when he was fired from the Wild earlier this season. I'm not a fan of it. I don't think he would work. I don't think he's the solution to what ails the Kraken here. That's just, it's, I don't know. I mean, look, he had some success in Minnesota. There's no denying that. But also, like, they bounced in the first round every year under him. He's a tough coach. He's one of those coaches that you bring in and you'll see some immediate shift in things, right? Effort level is not going to be a problem the first 2 seasons under him, but he wears on teams. He wears guys out. He has a finite shelf life as a coach, as Greg Berube would, as any of these kind of hard-nosed, bring down the hammer kind of coaches do. We see it in every sport, in every situation. They just have limited shelf lives. They wear on locker rooms. It's great in the interim, especially if you had a team that was maybe undisciplined, had effort issues, all that kind of stuff. They are the medicine to correct those problems, but they will wear on guys. And after years 2, 3, you are not going to have the same results. That's exactly what happened in Minnesota here. Guys stop wanting to play for that. They don't want to just get yelled at and screamed at and be told that what they're doing is wrong and getting cussed out day after day. It just wears on you, and at some point you just go, F it, I'm done. And that's my concern with all the kinds of coaches like a Dean Evason. Would he help in the short term? Does he make them a playoff team? Potentially, maybe even probably. But as we're looking at things like wanting to really get Matty back on track, development-wise, wanting to bring in Shane Wright for his first full NHL season and get him on the path to superstardom, I don't know that I want a kind of a hard ass in there to be that kind of guy who's just going to be on them over each and every little thing about bringing 110%, about bringing the physical element to their game. I don't know, as we bring in all these young guys for the Seattle Kraken, that's the kind of environment, or at least the coach that I want them to have, as they're going to need to be worried about a bunch of other things as they just adjust to the NHL.
Yeah, well, you brought up what I think is a very important general question. I think you also kind of answered it for yourself as far as what, do you want a coach like that, a hard ass, as you said, to be the next coach? And generally what you see in the NHL is that when you make a coaching change, especially one where the previous guy did not meet expectations, right? It's not just a natural transition. Like Hakstol had an extension. They're looking to do something different here. Mm-hmm. You will see it be generally the opposite of whatever the previous guy was. And it's kind of this cycle of you have a guy who's a player's coach and nice and friendly with the guys. And then that message kind of wears off. Guys get lazy. You bring in a hard ass. They get tired. The players get tired of him after 3 years and they just are sick of him. And so then they want somebody else. Then you bring in someone who's a little gentler with the players, right? And it's this cycle that kind of goes on. Given where we are with Hakstol, right? I mean, he was the ultimate players coach. The guys loved him. And we just talked about earlier in the podcast, his unwillingness to really take those difficult steps and really discipline the guys and create those consequences. I know you just gave your opinion on should they bring in somebody who's more the opposite of that. I think they need somebody who's a little bit further along on, in that spectrum between, players, coach, and I'll use the term that I think Morgan Geeky's dad would use. He said hardo.
Yeah.
When he'd refer, he's like, I was a bit of a hardo as a coach, to the youth, to Morgan in youth hockey. In that spectrum between players, coach, and hardo, where do you want this next coach to land? And I think you definitely want it more on the hardo side than what Dave Hakstol brought. But yeah, I don't think you want a total disciplinarian. I mean, that's why I'm maybe against like a Craig Berube or even, Dean Evison in this scenario. I mean, for Evison, really what it is like, you look at the playoff record. And I mean, Dylan, do you know when the last time he got out of the first round as a head coach was?
Well, it wasn't during his AHL coaching career, so we got to go back to his WHL coaching career. I happen to have it up in front of me, but yes, 2005.
Yeah, and that's as a co-coach. If you want to do like as a full, regular head coach, it's 2004 with the Vancouver Giants, and they lost in the second round. But you look at his whole playoff coaching career, and the guy's never made it out of the second round ever.
I'm looking at it. It looks like Vancouver, they lost in the first round in 03-04.
Oh, okay. This says lost in round 2. But anyway, I mean, still, you go back at his playoff results, just going backwards with the Wild. Lost in round 1, lost in round 1, lost in round 1, lost in qualifying round. To the AHL, no playoffs, lost in round 1, no playoffs, lost in round 1, lost in round 1.
Yeah. and that's the kind of stuff that, like, the idea of a coach like that who is going to be an all-effort kind of guy, who's going to get your team to play hard, that's what you bring them in for, is to be able to change the culture come playoff time and get the guys to reach that level, to be like a Daryl Sutter kind of guy who's going to get his team to go in hard on the forecheck and punish the other team and not let them break out and play the tough systems and all of that kind of stuff. And what this is telling me is that doesn't necessarily happen under Evison.
Right. If you're going to be that style of coach, and I think it can be certainly effective at times.
It can be.
You got to have the playoff success to show for it.
Yes, yeah, there are teams that need it. I don't know that a young developing team like the Kraken, where the 2 to 3 year outlook for what really is going to be best for them, I don't know that that's what this team needs.
And I think that's the side of the team that you want to embrace. Because look, I think some of the veterans in the room do need that.
Yeah, they do, actually.
Because you have basically two, parts of the Kraken core, right? You have the guys who are like, 28, 29 and older. And then you have the guys who are, 25, 26 and younger. And I think the younger side of the team doesn't need that. They need somebody who's, I get Dan Bilesman's like perfect, right? Where you have a system, you're nice, you run it. But, the older guys, I think they do need that. Mm-hmm. And I think it actually would be effective, but I don't know that you want to tailor. You only get one head coach. Yeah. There's no co-coaches like whatever was going on in Calgary in 04-05 in the WHL with Evison, right? You can't do co-coaches. So you need to prioritize one group over the other. And I think it's got to be the young guys.
Yeah, agreed. That's where I'm at. We'll see if Ron agrees. I mean, if you're Ron, you might lean the other way because it's those veterans that are going to determine whether or not the team really makes the playoffs and whether or not you keep your job. So maybe we see it go the other way.
Yeah, it's possible. But I do think that's something that he's going to have to consider. And that's a tough decision because I wouldn't know immediately where I would land on that. You're going to have a lot of different options. This is one of those things that makes being an NHL GM such a difficult job because you have to make those decisions and there's no clear right or wrong answer.
Yeah, and why your first hire is really important. Because if it doesn't work out like this situation has, you've only got one chance, and now you've got to make that call. And it's possible you make the wrong one, and that's it for you. So not an enviable position in that regard. Otherwise, pretty nice gig.
Yeah, no, otherwise, definitely. I mean, it certainly would be my dream job, but it's difficult. And I mean, as you say, no wrong answers. But speaking of wrong answers, a couple names I want to throw on here. Todd McClellan. I mean, you've heard my spiel about him before. His teams are kind of mentally fragile, and I don't want to see the Kraken play the 1-3-1 that he likes either. It's boring hockey, and it hasn't even really been that effective too. No. I mean, the Kraken are already okay defensively. Don't go with Todd McClellan. And then the other guy, if he does shake loose, which I'm sure he's probably not going to last another week, but Sheldon Keefe in Toronto, like, yes, he has the regular season success, but that's just because that team has a lot of talent on it. Yeah. Absolutely not. You've given your spiel about Sheldon Keefe in the past. I think we can both agree. neither of those guys are the answer.
Yeah, Sheldon Keefe would be the biggest disaster for me. I think I joked about it last week. Like if they do it, I'm just quitting ECH. Like I can't do it. I'm just done.
I wouldn't blame you.
Which maybe I shouldn't put that out there. If the team doesn't want me around, they now know what to do. But that's
would it be really worth it though?
I don't think it would be. But yeah, Sheldon Keefe would be the absolute worst case scenario for me, and for a lot of the reasons that we're seeing right now. I mean, he's basically doing the exact same thing that Dave Hakstol did this postseason run. Go watch his press conferences. People are like, well, what, after a loss to send them down 3-1 in a series. And they're like, look, there's effort questions, blah, blah, blah. And he's just like, no, I thought our effort was fine. Really?
Yeah. And I know the whole, we had a lot of respect in the handshake line, more respect this year in the hand. That's been meme to hell. But yeah, that really does speak to the mindset there on why they don't have more success.
Yeah, no, he is not the guy. I don't think he's good at communicating with players based on every behind the scenes thing I've ever seen there, which there's a lot of because it's Toronto. But just his way of communicating to the players, I think that he is a smart guy. He understands things as a coach. But if you can't communicate them effectively to players, and you're going to have some of the same like letting guys slide issues that Hakstol had, like I can't see why that would work here in Seattle at all.
Yeah, I agreed on those. And I like we said, we'll go deeper into some options that, we like, that we don't like once we can do a little bit more research. But those are some initial names that I've seen thrown out there and our initial reactions to them.
Yep, definitely. And I think that's important. But we are over the hour mark. I want to make sure we can get this out as soon as possible for everybody to listen to. So I think we'll go ahead and close it up here. Again, there was the phenomenal news about the Kraken changing broadcasting partners, going away from Root, going with King 5 and Kong. It's going to make the games a lot more accessible, going with Amazon Prime Video for the streaming rights in market, which is going to be important not just for those people in and around Seattle, but places like, say, Alaska, where we know the Kraken have a lot of fans and it's been difficult for them to get games. Like, this is truly the best case scenario for the Kraken. It was something that was desperately needed. We'll get into the more specific breakdowns of all that kind of stuff next week on the podcast. We just had to talk about the big news of the day for sure. So thanks everybody for hanging in there with that kind of change. Let us know your thoughts on everything, who you want to see as a head coach, because we can talk about them next week as well when we break down other candidates that we bring up. So please, if you're watching on YouTube, leave comments about people you want to hear us talk about. That would be great. You can hit us up on Twitter or Instagram as well, and kind of throw those names out there at Emerald City Hockey HKY. That'll be fantastic as well. I'm sure everybody who's listening to this knows already how to find us there, but that reminder doesn't hurt. And of course, join me tonight. If you're listening to this with time, join me tonight on patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, where I will be doing the prospect chat, going over what the Kraken should do at the top of this year's draft. Really excited and looking forward to having that first conversation with all the patrons that we have over there. So looking forward to that. One more big shout out to Queen Anne Beer Hall for sponsoring the podcast like they do each and every week. Make sure to check them out, and we will see you all next time.
Hey everyone, before we go, we just wanted to give a quick shout out to all of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/Emerald City Hockey, especially our Terror of the Deep patrons: Absurdly Sane, Alaska Joe, Alex, Amanda, Amy, Andrew, Andy, Anonymous, Anthony, Becca, Beef, Ben, Brad, Bryce, Burnt Creme, Caden, Kat, Kaylin, Chandler, Charles, Shazzle Dazzle, Chip, Chris, Clutch, Cody, Connor, Coop, Corey, Cutter, Dan, Danny39, Denise, DJ Singletone, Duthin, Dylan, Evie99, Eli, Elizabeth, Ethan, Evan, Fusion Mix, Gaby, Gabrielle, Gary, Gregory, Helena, Habak, Jane, Jenna, Jessica, John, Joni, Joseph, Josh, Joshua, Julia, Justin, Katie, Kepler, Kevin, Kitty B. Kraken, Cole, Kyle,
L. Bell, Leanne, Levin, Light, Little Tennis Guy 8, Lonnie, Mac and Cheese, Maeve, Mark, Max, Maya, Michael, Michelle, Nick, Night Drop, Noah, Nunya, Olivia, Paige, Patty, Paul, Rayanne, Randall, Rebecca, Robert, Rocklicker, Ryan, Sarah, Scott, Sia Kraken, Sean, Sergey, Sergeant Pickles, Shannon, Skeletal Tendency, Stacy, Steven, Striatic, Tasty Kobold, Team 114 Chris, Ty, Virginia, Wendy, Where the Slovakians At, and Zoe. Thank you so much for making all this possible. We really appreciate your support.